When I enlarged the photograph, I wept. Because the person in that picture was me. Now, let me tell you what extraordinary thing happened that day. It was colder than usual that afternoon. Mid-November, when the wind carried fallen leaves down the narrow streets. I was walking alone through the neighborhood flea market. The only small joy I had these days. Staying home felt suffocating, so wandering among strangers somehow made me feel less lonely. Old furniture, worn-out books, dusty records. I passed by the rows of forgotten things until a small wooden box caught my eye. Inside, it was filled with old black and white photographs. They looked like fragments of other people's lives that had been abandoned. $1 each, the vendor said casually. I nodded and began to look through them. A faded wedding portrait, a class photo from a schoolyard. A young mother smiling while holding her child. Each one must have been precious to someone once. Then, my fingers stopped. A single photograph had caught on my hand. It was black and white, a man standing on a snowy street, facing the camera. He wore a heavy overcoat, one hand in his pocket, his head slightly lowered. I couldn't see his expression clearly, but on his left wrist I saw a watch. My heart dropped. That watch, I knew that watch. My hands trembled as I lifted the photo closer. A round silver case. A leather strap. A tiny scratch near the 3 o'clock mark. There was no mistake. It was my husband's watch. Excuse me, I asked, my voice shaking. Where did you get this photograph? The man shrugged. Don't know. Came out of an old house someone was cleaning up. Nobody knows who it belonged to. I handed him the coin and walked away, the photo clutched in my hand. My heart was racing. I told myself it couldn't be, it was just a coincidence. A watch that looked the same. But something inside me was burning. Trembling with a strange mixture of fear and hope. Back home, I sat on the sofa and pulled open the curtains. The afternoon light touched the worn edges of the photo. It had aged, corners frayed, surface speckled with faint stains and creases. Then I turned it over. On the back, faint handwriting in ink. Winter, 1953, the first snowfall after our farewell. 1953. I remembered that year. That winter, my husband went to war. We held hands in silence, knowing he might never come back. And on the day the first snow fell, we said our last goodbye at the train station. I'll be back soon, he told me. Those were the last words he ever said to me. He never returned. Even after the war ended, there was no word, no letter, no record. Not even a name on the missing list. I waited for years, until hope itself felt like a kind of cruelty. But now, this photograph. What was it trying to tell me? If the man in the picture was really him, who took it? And how did it end up here, in my hands, after all these years? I reached for a magnifying glass. The man's face was still blurred, but the watch was unmistakable. The more I looked, the stronger the certainty grew inside me. Then I noticed something else. The background. Beyond the snow-covered street, faintly visible behind the man, a shop sign. A telephone pole, and next to it, the shadow of another figure. Someone was standing there. My heart started to pound. I leaned closer. The shadow was a woman wearing a coat, head slightly lowered. Her face wasn't clear, but something about her posture. The curve of her shoulders felt familiar. No, it couldn't be. I shook my head, trying to brush off the thought. But a storm was rising inside me. Fear, curiosity, and a quiet ache that words couldn't explain. That night, I couldn't sleep. The photo lay on the bedside table, and even in the dark, I could see the faint outline of the man and that shadow of a woman behind him. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed. I was standing on a snowy street. The air was cold, the snow crunching beneath my feet. Far away, a man stood in a long coat. It was my husband. He was looking at me, but he didn't wave. He just stood there, silent. I tried to run toward him, but my legs wouldn't move. And then, somewhere close, I heard the sound of a camera shutter. Click. When I opened my eyes, my pillow was wet with tears. The next morning, I took the photo to a small old photo studio in town. It was one of the few places that still developed black and white film. The faint smell of chemicals lingered in the air. As the elderly man behind the counter looked up. "Good morning," he said. "Can you enlarge this for me?" I asked, handing him the picture. He squinted at it. "Old one, huh? Looks like it's from the 50s. Yes, could you make the background clearer?" He nodded, scanning it carefully. Lines, brightness, contrast. He worked in silence, adjusting the faded image. "Is this the person you're curious about?" he asked, pointing at the screen. I stepped closer and froze. There she was. The woman in the background, now a little clearer. She stood facing the man, her head slightly bowed. Her face was still half hidden, but her profile, her coat. The small handbag in her hand. My voice broke. That bag. It was mine. The same one I carried that winter day in 1953, the day I saw my husband off. The small leather bag my mother had given me, the one with the frayed stitching on the handle. I stepped back, dizzy. The man behind the counter asked gently, "Ma'am, are you all right?" I couldn't answer. My hands were shaking. My chest hurt. "I'll print this out for you," he said quietly. "Give me a moment." He disappeared into the darkroom. I sat down, trembling, waiting, not sure if I wanted to see the truth or run away from it. When the old man returned from the darkroom, he was holding a sheet of paper. It was the enlarged print the size of a letter page. I took it with trembling hands. The woman in the photo was now clearer. Her side profile, her collar turned up against the cold. And that small bag in her hand all matched exactly what I remembered from that day. "Thank you," I whispered, and stepped out of the shop. The wind outside was sharp. I couldn't feel it. I just walked, the photo pressed against my chest. At home, I laid the pictures side by side on the table. The original and the enlarged one. And as I stared at them, memories I had buried long ago began to rise like smoke. Winter, 1953. The day of the first snow. That morning, I left home early. I wore my thick coat and carried the small leather bag my mother had passed down to me. Inside it was a letter, one I had written to my husband. At the station, the platform was crowded. People were crying, whispering goodbyes that felt like prayers. Snow was falling, silent and heavy. I saw him across the tracks, among the soldiers. He saw me too, and raised his hand. We moved toward each other through the crowd, until we stood together at the far end of the platform, where no one was watching. "I'll write to you," he said quietly. His voice was low, heavy. "So will I replied, pulling the envelope from my bag. "Please read it on the train." He nodded, tucking it into his coat pocket. Then he held my hands. "I'll be back soon." Those words again. His last promise. I nodded, but my tears betrayed me. He brushed them away and smiled faintly. "Don't cry. It won't be long." But we both knew. It might be forever. The whistle blew. He let go of my hands and walked toward the train. I stood still, watching him go. The snow fell harder, blurring everything, the crowd, the platform, even the train. Just before stepping inside, he turned back and waved. I raised my hand too. And then he was gone. When I finally turned to leave, I passed a man standing at the edge of the square, holding a camera. He was taking pictures. I remember glancing at him for a second and then walking away. That was all. I never saw my husband again. Years passed. The war ended. His name appeared on no list, not the living, not the dead. He had simply vanished, like snow melting into the earth. I waited. For years. For decades, until waiting became its own kind of sorrow. But I never forgot him. Every snowy day, I thought of that platform, of the way he looked back at me. And sometimes, I would whisper into the quiet of my empty room. Should I have held on tighter? Should I have gone with him? There was never an answer, only silence, and the slow ticking of time. Now, as I held this photograph, I realized it was proof that moment had truly existed, that he had been real, that I had been there. But something about it still felt wrong. Who took this picture? And why was it here, now, waiting for me after all these years? The next day, I returned to the flea market. I had to find the vendor again, maybe he had more photographs. Something else from that same house. The market was busier this time. I pushed through the crowd until I found him in the same corner. "Do you remember me?" I asked. He nodded. "The black and white photo lady, right?" "Yes. Where did you say these came from?" He scratched his head. "Just from an old house. Someone said the owner died long ago, and the relatives were cleaning it out. I bought the box cheap. Do you know the address?" He hesitated, then pulled a crumpled note from his pocket. "Here." I wrote it down. "Somewhere not far from here, probably empty now." "Thank you." I clutched the paper and left the market. My heart was pounding as I followed the directions. 3 bus stops away, down a narrow street of aging houses. With rusted gates and cracked tiles, I found it. The gate was half open. The yard was overgrown with weeds. The house looked abandoned, dust clouding the windows, roof tiles missing, silence heavy in the air. "Is this it?" I whispered. I pushed the gate gently and stepped inside. The air smelled of wood and time. The front door creaked open easily, it wasn't locked. Inside, the living room was frozen in another era. An old radio, a couch covered with a faded blanket. Empty picture frames hung crookedly on the wall. In the corner stood a small chest of drawers. I opened them one by one. The first held newspapers, receipts, fragments of everyday life. The second, a few old letters and notebooks. Then, when I opened the third drawer, I stopped breathing. There it was. Another photograph. It was the same man. The same snowy day. But this time, the angle was closer. He was standing there, and beside him, I was too. Neither of us looked at the camera. He was gazing upward, and I was looking at him. The snow fell between us, soft and endless. My hands shook as I lifted the photo. Who took this? Why was it here, in this house? I turned it over. On the back, written in neat handwriting. They parted, but love remained. Someone had been there, watching us. Someone who captured that last moment and left these traces behind. I sank to the floor, clutching the photograph. Tears blurred my vision until the room faded away. For a long time, I stayed like that, not in the present, but in that winter from so long ago. Then something caught my eye. A faint glimmer from beneath the drawer. I reached down and picked it up. A wristwatch. A silver case. A leather strap. A tiny scratch at 3 o'clock. My husband's watch. How is this here? No sound came out. I sat there, frozen, the watch cold in my palm. And then I realized, this house, it wasn't just any house. It was the house of the person who took that photograph. And that person had kept my husband's watch. Why? I searched again, opening the last drawer at the bottom. There, hidden beneath old papers, was a small journal. The cover was cracked and the edges worn. I opened it carefully. On the first page, written in faded ink, "Winter, 1953. I saw a couple today. They were saying goodbye. The woman was crying. The man held her close." I raised my camera. I felt I had to capture this moment. I turned the page. The train left. The man was gone. The woman stood alone for a long time. I took her picture, too. Her sorrow was too deep to ignore. Another page. Months later, I saw that man again. He was in a hospital. He had survived the war, but he had lost his memory. He didn't know who he was, where he came from, or who he loved. But on his wrist was the same watch. My breath caught. I asked him if he remembered anything. He shook his head. The doctor said his memory might return or maybe never. I kept his watch, hoping to give it back someday. My hands trembled as I turned the next page. But he never recovered. A few years later, he left the hospital. I don't know where he went. I only had his watch and the photos. Sometimes I look at them and wonder, is she still waiting for him? Or has she already let him go? The last page read, I leave these behind, the photos, the watch, hoping that someday someone will find them and know that their story was not forgotten. When I closed the journal, tears were streaming down my face. He had been alive. He had returned from the war but without his memories. And I had lived my whole life believing he was gone. We had spent our lives under the same sky, searching for each other in silence. I stepped outside, still clutching the watch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in red and gold. I walked slowly down the quiet street, the sound of my footsteps echoing against the cold air. At the bus stop, I sat down and looked at the watch resting in my hand. Its hands were still frozen at 3 o'clock. Yet somehow it felt alive, as if time itself had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment. That night, back home, I laid everything on my desk. The original photo, the enlarged photo, the new one I'd found in the abandoned house, and beside them the watch. I stared at them for a long time. In those pictures we were still young. Still standing in that falling snow before the world tore us apart. And then, I remembered something. The letter. The one I had given him that day. The one I told him to read on the train. I closed my eyes, trying to recall the words. To my dearest. By the time you read this, you'll already be far away. I cried as I watched you go, but I tried to smile so you wouldn't worry. I'll wait for you, no matter how long it takes. Every time it snows, I'll think of this day. The day we stood together, the day I held your hand. Please come back safely. The world without you feels too cold, too quiet. I love you, always. That was what I had written. But he never read it. He had forgotten, not by choice, but by fate. I looked again at the photo. At the woman in the background. Me standing there with my head lowered, watching him leave. And suddenly, I understood. In that photo, I was crying. But I was also smiling. Because even as I let him go, I had promised myself I would keep believing. I whispered softly, I'm sorry. To the woman I once was. And to the man I loved. I should have searched longer. I should have believed you were still out there. But I was afraid. Afraid that you'd never come back. So I gave up first. I let go before you did. The woman in the photograph said nothing. She just stood there, forever captured in the snow. I picked up the watch and fastened it around my wrist. It didn't tick, but I could feel the faint weight of it. Like a heartbeat that had been waiting for years. I know now, I said softly. You lived. You just forgot me. I looked out the window. Stars had begun to appear, faint and trembling. Somewhere in that vast sky, maybe he was out there not remembering my name. But still breathing under the same light. And I smiled. It's all right, I whispered. Wherever you are, our love remains. In this photograph, in this watch, and in my heart. I pressed the photo to my chest. I can forgive now. The me who gave up. The me who kept going. The me who survived. The night grew deeper, and the house was silent. I placed the photos and the watch neatly on the desk and stood up. In the corner of the room was an old drawer. I opened it and took out a blank sheet of paper. Then, I began to write again, not to him, but to myself. To the woman I used to be. I remember where you stood that day. You were crying, but you smiled anyway. I know now how hard that was. You did your best loving, believing, and waiting. That was enough. You didn't give up, you just kept living. And that wasn't wrong. Now we've met again in these photos, this watch, this memory. Thank you for holding on. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for never letting go of love. With all my heart. From the woman you became. When I finished the letter, my chest felt lighter. I placed it beside the photographs and quietly left the room. That night, for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. In my dream, I was back on that snowy street, but this time, I wasn't alone. He was there, beside me, his hand in mine. It's all right, he said. We're all right. I nodded, smiling, and we began to walk together through the snow. Down a road with no end, but no fear either. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the window. I rose, walked to the desk, and looked at everything once more. The photos, the watch, the letter, they were still there, but something inside me had changed. I picked up the photograph and walked to the window. The morning light made the image shine softly. There we were standing in the snow, looking at each other, forever caught in that single moment. Goodbye, I whispered. I'll let you go now. You and the me who never could. I placed the photograph in a frame and hung it on the wall. The watch stayed on the desk, not locked away, but resting quietly. Now, that picture no longer lives in a drawer. It lives inside my heart. The past has ended, but love remains. In the photograph, in the watch, and in my memory. Thank you for listening, and may your night be warm. For more stories of love and remembrance, please visit Hwanghon Theater 7080 on YouTube.